So, um, I want you to picture a specific moment for a second.
Yo.
Maybe, maybe you're sitting in this sterile conference room at work. Or maybe you're just staring at a text message thread at 2 in the morning.
Right. We've all been there.
Yeah. And like 10 minutes ago, you initiated this conversation armed with objective facts. You had dates, you had screenshots, you had a completely legitimate grievance about something that was done to you.
You had your ducks in a row.
Exactly. But somehow, through this series of like conversational sleights of hand, the room just starts to tilt.
Yeah.
The facts you brought in are being totally dismantled. Your memory is suddenly being interrogated.
Yeah.
And this sudden, just suffocating wave of confusion washes over you.
It's terrifying.
It really is. Your heart is hammering against your ribs. And then, comes the absolute punchline. By the end of this interaction, you are the one apologizing.
Wow. Yeah, it is a visceral, like, whole-body disorientation.
Right.
You don't just feel unheard. You feel like the fundamental fabric of reality has basically been pulled out from under you.
Exactly.
It just leaves you in this total freefall of self-doubt.
Yeah, and I was reading through the stack of clinical psychology and, like, neuroscience papers we pulled for today's deep dive, and the analogy that kept coming to my mind was an X-ray machine.
Oh, I like that. How so?
Well, usually when we talk about human injury, right, we rely on visible proof. You fall off a bike, you break your collarbone, the doctor holds up the film, and there it is. There's the jagged white line.
It's binary. It's undeniable.
Undeniable. The damage is localized. It's quantifiable. But, when we step into the ecosystem of toxic relationships or covert narcissism and systemic emotional manipulation.
The X-ray machine is entirely useless.
Completely useless.
Huh.
We're looking at a profound psychological and actually neurological injury that is completely invisible to the naked eye.
Right.
And so that is exactly what we are mapping today. We are bypassing the surface level labels of, bad behavior to really investigate the hidden psychological machinery of emotional predators.
The deeper layers.
Exactly. We're looking at why these individuals are compelled to manipulate, like what their tactics physically do to your brain chemistry, and most importantly, how to biologically and strategically hack your own nervous system to reclaim your reality.
And the sources we're drawing from for this are just a fascinating spectrum.
They really are.
We are pulling insights from clinical psychoanalysis, specifically looking at the structure of the narcissistic ego.
Yeah, that part was wild.
Oh, totally. Plus trauma research on complex adaptations, neuroscience papers detailing the electrophysiology of threat detection, and even strategic communication frameworks designed by legal experts for high conflict environments.
Right.
By synthesizing all these disciplines, we basically uncover this cohesive mechanical system of abuse.
And as I was synthesizing these frameworks, this concept emerged that completely reframed the way I view human trauma.
What was it?
Well, if you have ever experienced those intense, destabilizing reactions to a manipulator like the sudden crying spells or the inability to articulate your thoughts, the urge to just scream or feeling totally paralyzed,
Yeah.
those reactions are not evidence of your fragility.
No, not at all.
Right. They are not signs that you are broken or, quote-unquote, crazy.
That is the pivotal paradigm shift right there.
It changes everything.
It does. Because those intense physiological and emotional floodings, they're actually evidence that your biological survival system is functioning flawlessly.
Flawlessly.
Yes. Your brain and your body are executing these highly evolved protocols designed to protect you from a lethal, albeit invisible, predator.
A flawless survival system against an invisible predator. I mean, that just gives me chills.
It's empowering, really.
It is. But to understand the defense, I feel like we first have to really understand the predator's camouflage.
Right, the mask.
Exactly. I want to look at the psychological architecture of the covert narcissist, or what several clinical papers in our stack refer to as the empty self.
Yeah, the empty self concept is crucial here.
And there is this historical concept brought up in the research that I thought perfectly encapsulates their public persona. It's called sprezzatura.
Oh, sprezzatura. That is such a fascinating inclusion in this psychological context.
I had never heard of it before.
It's a term from the Italian Renaissance, actually. It was popularized in a 16th century manual called The Book of the Courtier.
Okay.
And it translates roughly to the art of hiding art.
The art of hiding art.
Right. It is the deliberate, highly practiced performance of making something that is extraordinarily difficult appear entirely effortless.
Oh, man. It's like the swan gliding across the glass-like surface of a lake.
That's the perfect analogy.
Right. Above the water, you see this pure serenity, elegance, unbothered superiority.
But if you look beneath the surface...
You see the frantic, desperate paddling just to keep from sinking.
Yes.
But, in the case of a malignant narcissist or a toxic corporate climber, they aren't just paddling furiously.
No, they're not.
They are actively standing on the necks of other ducks to keep themselves elevated.
Oh, yes. And the clinical psychology beneath that swan metaphor is profound.
Go into that. What's happening underneath?
Well, when we look at a narcissist's grandiosity, that effortless, superior, untouchable persona they project, we naturally assume it stems from an overabundance of self-esteem. Right?
Yeah, you think they just love themselves too much?
Exactly. But the psychological reality is the exact opposite.
Wait, really?
Yeah, that grandiosity is basically a rigid, highly constructed exoskeleton. Beneath it, there is no stable ego.
There's nothing there.
Just a hollow core characterized by profound, unresolved shame and a terrifying sense of inadequacy.
Wow.
The narcissist is not in love with themselves. They are in love with the reflection of the false self they have constructed to hide that internal void.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
Which completely explains the concept of intellectual extractivism that was mentioned in our workplace psychology sources. Because they lack a true, stable identity of their own, they basically have to continually harvest from the people around them.
Yes. Harvest is the right word.
It's like the manager who, subtly signs their name to the brilliant strategy deck you spent 3 weeks building. Or that charismatic friend who just seamlessly adopts your jokes, your taste in music, your worldview, as if they invented them.
It's so insidious.
It is. One of the sociological papers from Brazil quoted this local proverb that I thought was just brilliant. It said, "A parrot eats the corn, but the parakeet takes the fame."
Oh, that's incredibly accurate. And that extraction goes way beyond just taking credit for work.
What do you mean?
It is literal identity theft on a psychological level.
Oh.
Clinicians refer to this as mirroring.
Mirroring.
Yeah. Because the covert narcissist is essentially an empty vessel, they observe their targets. And usually they target people who possess the empathy, creativity, or warmth that the narcissist secretly envies. And then they mimic those traits. They construct this chameleon-like collage of the personalities they have exploited over the years.
That is deeply unsettling.
It is. They don't just steal your ideas, they consume your essence to patch the holes in their own armor.
Consume your essence. Jeez. And this brings us to the fuel that powers this entire extraction machine, right? Narcissistic supply.
Yes, narcissistic supply, the lifeblood of the disorder.
I always thought of supply as just like a basic desire for attention, like someone who just wants to be the center of the party.
Yeah.
But looking at the psychoanalytic models in our research, it is so much more desperate than that.
It's not just desire. It is absolute psychological dependency.
Of a literal life support system.
Exactly. Because the narcissist has a structural deficit, meaning they lack the internal mechanisms to self-regulate their self-worth, to soothe their own anxieties, or to process their own shame.
They literally cannot do those things internally.
Right. So they require an external regulator.
Right.
And that external regulator is narcissistic supply.
Okay, so what does that actually look like?
Well, it can be positive supply, things like admiration, subservience, public praise. But crucially, it can also be negative supply.
Negative supply, like what?
Your tears, your visible anxiety, your desperate attempts to defend yourself against them.
Wait, they feed on that.
Yes. To the pathological ego, the flavor of the emotion doesn't matter at all. The sheer intensity of your reaction is what provides them with evidence of their own existence and power.
Wow. The flavor of the emotion doesn't matter. That answers a paradox that was literally driving me crazy while reading the source material.
What was the paradox?
If a malignant narcissist genuinely believes they are the smartest, most superior entity in the room, why are they so obsessed with micromanaging a junior employee? Or they're dominating every minor decision a spouse makes? Like, if they're a god, shouldn't they just be completely indifferent to the mortals?
You would think so logically, yeah.
But the reality is, their superiority is a parasitic construct.
Yes.
If they lose their grip on you, they lose their emotional dialysis machine.
That's a brilliant way to put it, an emotional dialysis machine.
Right. And if they lose that, they are forced to sit alone with their own toxicity.
And that is a state of psychological annihilation that they will do absolutely anything to avoid.
They're terrified of it.
Exactly. This is why equality in a relationship or even in a workplace feels like a literal survival threat to them.
Because if you're equal,
If you are their equal, you are no longer available to serve as their emotional dumping ground. Therefore, they must continuously engineer scenarios that reinforce their dominance and your subordination.
which completely explains the mechanics of sabotage we see in high-conflict environments.
Right. It's not just a competitive edge.
No, it's a zero-sum game for their ego survival.
Yes.
Like, the sources detail how they'll deliberately withhold crucial unwritten institutional knowledge when you start a new role. They basically guarantee you will make a visible mistake.
They manufacture dependency.
Exactly. And then there are the smear campaigns.
Yeah.
And the flying monkeys.
Ah, the flying monkeys, such a vivid term.
It really is. Can you explain that one?
Sure. The term is borrowed from The Wizard of Oz. It describes the enablers, the gossip conduits, and the naive bystanders that the narcissist actively recruits to do their dirty work.
So the narcissist doesn't even get their hands dirty.
Never. The narcissist will run a covert smear campaign, planting subtle seeds of doubt about your competence or maybe your stability with your colleagues or family members.
Like, I'm really worried about her stress levels lately.
Exactly. She seems so erratic, they'll whisper with this feigned, deep concern.
Oh, that makes my blood boil.
And then the flying monkeys begin to treat you with suspicion. They effectively isolate you, while the narcissist sits back, hands perfectly clean.
It is the systemic construction of a reality where you are mathematically guaranteed to fail.
Yes.
And then, on top of that, you are pathologized for that failure.
Exactly. But the terrifying part is they don't just set the board and wait for you to fail.
No.
No, they actively force your hand. They need that negative supply, remember? So they manufacture the conflict. They bait you.
Oh, man. Narcissistic baiting. Let's pivot to that. Because it's not merely like picking a fight.
No, it is a highly calibrated predatory mechanism.
Right.
It's designed specifically to bypass your prefrontal cortex, which is your logical brain, and strike directly at your deepest emotional vulnerabilities.
Because they study you.
They study your triggers meticulously. If they know you pride yourself on your integrity, they will casually question your honesty.
Oh.
If they know you fear abandonment, they will manufacture scenarios where you feel easily replaceable.
And the sources outline a deeply unsettling taxonomy of these baiting tactics.
Yes, there are several distinct categories.
Like, there are cornering questions,
Right.
where literally any answer you give is an admission of guilt.
Yes.
And there's these curiosity traps, like they'll sigh heavily and say, well, I finally heard what everyone in the department is saying about you.
And then they refuse to elaborate.
Exactly. Just to watch your anxiety spiral.
It's sadistic.
It is.
Ah.
But the most insidious are the crazy-making scripts designed to induce cognitive dissonance.
Cognitive dissonance is key here. It's the psychological distress you experience when you hold two contradictory beliefs, or when you're faced with a reality that directly contradicts your own lived experience.
And they induce this through targeted linguistic scripts.
Right. They trivialize your boundaries by saying things like, you are so overly sensitive, nobody else would care about this.
Or they disguise blatant cruelty as humor. Can't you take a joke? You have no sense of humor.
And of course, the foundational tool of all cognitive dissonance, gaslighting.
Right. Flatly denying a shared reality.
With statements like, that conversation never happened. You are literally making things up.
What fascinates me, though, is the why. Like, the deep why behind this specific brand of psychological torture.
Why they do it.
Yeah, why do they get satisfaction from watching a competent, rational person dissolve into tears or start yelling defensively?
Ah, the psychoanalytic explanation in our stack points to projection.
Projection. Okay, unpack that.
So the manipulator is essentially carrying around this massive reservoir of unbearable internal chaos. We're talking shame, self-hatred, anxiety.
Stuff their fragile ego cannot metabolize.
Exactly. It's too toxic for them to hold. So projection is a defense mechanism where they externalize their own unacceptable feelings by attributing them to someone else.
Meaning they put it on you.
They act as a syringe, injecting their own internal chaos directly into you.
That is a terrifying image. A syringe of chaos.
But it's functionally what happens. When they successfully bait you into losing your temper, they can point their finger and say, look at you. You are the unstable one. You are the abusive one.
Wow. Because by watching you carry their emotional garbage, they get relief.
Yes. They experience a profound, albeit temporary, relief from their own pathology. They have successfully outsourced their madness.
Outsource their madness. And, you know, the absolute zenith of this outsourcing, like the masterstroke of manipulative projection, is a behavioral loop identified by psychologist Jennifer Freyd.
Ah, yes. Darvo.
Darvo. You see this acronym everywhere in the forensic psychology and domestic abuse literature. Deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender.
DARVO is the systemic, entirely predictable algorithm that abusers use to evade accountability anytime they are confronted.
It is almost startling how universally it is applied.
Everywhere. Family court, corporate HR disputes, intimate partner conflicts, it's the same script.
Let's really break down the mechanics of this algorithm because it's so important.
Let's do it.
So imagine you approach the person calmly. You say, when you CC the entire team on an email outlining my minor mistake, it felt incredibly undermining.
A perfectly reasonable, calm confrontation.
Right. So, step one, deny. They look you dead in the eye and say, I didn't do that to undermine you. You're misremembering the context.
Step 2, attack. They pivot from the actual event to your character.
The real problem is that you are completely unable to take feedback.
You're paranoid and impossible to work with.
Right. And then the mechanism clicks into its final, devastating gear. Reverse victim and offender.
They adopt the posture of the injured party.
Yep. In fact, I am the one walking on eggshells around you. Your false accusations and constant neediness are destroying my mental health. I am the victim of your toxic behavior.
It is psychological whiplash.
Whiplash is the perfect word.
Yeah.
You walk into the room seeking a basic acknowledgement of harm.
And you walk out apologizing to them for having the audacity to notice their abuse.
Exactly. But I want to go deeper into the cognitive impact here. Because our sources highlight that DARVO doesn't just confuse the victim in the moment.
No, it does lasting damage.
Right. Repeated exposure causes measurable neurological and psychological devastation.
It fundamentally disrupts the brain's ability to consolidate memory.
Wait, it actually messes with your memory.
But absolutely. Under normal circumstances, when an event occurs, your hippocampus processes the data into a cohesive narrative, right? A stable memory.
Right.
But DARVO introduces a high-stress, high-cortisol environment simultaneously with a contradictory narrative.
Oh, wow.
When the abuser attacks your reality while you are in a state of emotional shock, your brain's memory-making apparatus becomes incredibly malleable. It glitches.
So you start to doubt what actually happened.
Worse than doubt. Research shows that sustained exposure to DARVO directly correlates with an internalization of the false narrative.
Meaning, you start to believe their lie.
The victim begins to genuinely believe they are the perpetrator. It erodes the foundational trust you have in your own cognition.
That is deeply chilling. It perfectly sets up the biological reality of what is happening inside the victim's body, though.
Yes, biology is the key layer here.
Right, because if we want to understand why a highly intelligent, rational person can't just, out-logic DARVO in real time, we have to look at the neuroscience.
We have to examine the amygdala hijack.
The amygdala hijack. Break this down for us.
So to grasp the magnitude of the amygdala hijack, we have to look at our evolutionary wiring. Deep within the temporal lobes of your brain lies the amygdala.
It's like a small almond-shaped cluster, right?
Exactly. And it functions as our primal threat detection center. It's this ancient biological alarm system designed to ensure our immediate survival in a hostile physical environment.
It's the hardware that basically kept our ancestors from being eaten by predators on the savannah.
Right. It detects a tiger, floods the body with adrenaline, and initiates the fight, flight, or freeze response.
But the critical flaw in our modern human operating system is that the amygdala is not particularly discerning, is it?
Not at all. It cannot differentiate between a literal physical threat to your life, like that tiger lunging at you, and a profound social or psychological threat to your identity and safety.
Like a sudden smear campaign.
Or a threat of divorce or a devastating DARVO attack from someone you intimately trust.
So when your toxic boss sends that passive-aggressive, reality-distorting email on a Friday afternoon,
your nervous system processes that exact same way it processes a physical ambush.
a literal ambush.
Biologically, yes.
Oh.
The moment the amygdala detects that psychological threat, it triggers an immediate cascade of stress hormone.
Right.
Primarily cortisol and adrenaline.
And this is where the hijack part comes in.
Precisely. To ensure you react fast enough to survive the tiger, the amygdala actively bypasses the prefrontal cortex.
And the prefrontal cortex is the logical part.
Right. It's the sophisticated, evolutionary, newer part of your brain responsible for executive functioning, logic, empathy, emotional regulation, complex problem solving.
So during an amygdala hijack, which is a term popularized by Daniel Goleman, right?
Yes.
During that hijack, that logical processing center is essentially taken offline.
Unplugged.
I try to visualize this like a computer system.
Yeah.
You were sitting there trying to write elegant, complex code to solve a problem.
That's your prefrontal cortex trying to articulate a calm, rational response to the abuser.
Exactly. But meanwhile, someone has ripped the casing off your hard drive and is pouring a bucket of electrified water directly onto the motherboard.
That is an incredibly accurate physiological metaphor.
The hardware is literally short-circuiting. You cannot access your vocabulary, your rationality, or your strategic planning because the biological electricity has been diverted to your limbs so you can run or fight.
And you are thrust into what neuroscientists call a refractory state.
Refractory state. What does that feel like?
In this state, your cognitive processing is radically narrowed. You are only capable of perceiving information that confirms the immediate threat.
Wow.
This is exactly why you cannot reason with an abuser when you are triggered, and honestly, why you cannot reason with yourself. You are locked in a biological mandate to survive the next 10 seconds.
Survive the next 10 seconds. And speaking of seconds, there was a piece of data in our neuroscience stack that I found completely paradigm shifting.
The 6-second rule?
The 6-second rule, what is that?
It is the biological half-life of an acute emotional hijacking.
Okay.
When the amygdala fires and releases that initial flood of stress chemicals, that chemical wave takes approximately 6 seconds to surge through the body and begin to naturally dissipate.
6 seconds. That's it.
That's it. But there's a massive caveat.
I knew there was a catch.
It only dissipates if the cognitive stimulus isn't reinforced.
Meaning,
if within those 6 seconds, your brain generates a thought like, they're trying to destroy my life, or if the abuser continues to speak and deliver more bait.
the amygdala fires again.
Exactly. Initiating a fresh wave of cortisol.
Oh, man. So if the abuser knows exactly what buttons to push, they can purposefully reignite that loop at second 5, over and over and over.
Keeping you trapped in a continuous refractory state for minutes or even hours.
But if you can somehow introduce a pause, if you can bite your tongue and wait 6 seconds without engaging, the biological tide begins to recede.
Yes, your prefrontal cortex can start to reboot.
This completely reframes how we view human reaction.
It really does. It reveals why our immediate split-second responses to baiting are almost always defensive, emotional, and highly regrettable.
Because it's just pure biology reacting.
Exactly. Pausing in the face of manipulation is not just polite communication etiquette. It is an absolute neurological necessity to reclaim the reins of your own mind.
But the reality of severe toxic dynamics is that the manipulator will not allow you to pause.
No, they won't.
They will follow you from room to room. They will blow up your phone with 40 text messages. They will relentlessly pour water on the motherboard until something explodes.
And when the victim finally does explode, we encounter one of the most dangerously misunderstood concepts in behavioral psychology.
Reactive abuse.
Yes. And this terminology is currently undergoing a massive and necessary overhaul in trauma-informed clinical circles.
Why is that?
Historically, when courts or HR departments or even couples therapists witnessed a dynamic where the abuser is sitting calmly while the victim is screaming, throwing something, or weeping hysterically.
They labeled the dynamic as mutually abusive.
Right. They pathologized the victim's explosion. But the modern reframe changes reactive abuse to reactive defense.
Reactive defense. I love that. Because the concept of mutual abuse implies a level playing field.
Exactly.
And you cannot be mutually abusive with someone who holds all the psychological power and has been systematically dismantling your reality for months.
You can't. Reactive defense is an involuntary, instinctual response to prolonged systemic psychological torture.
It's the pressure valve blowing.
Exactly. The abuser carefully builds the tension, isolates the victim from their support systems, and applies relentless covert pressure. When the victim finally hits their absolute physiological and psychological limit, they explode.
They yell, they use profanity, they lash out.
And the moment they do, notice what happens to the abuser.
Their demeanor instantly shifts to calm.
Because they got exactly what they wanted.
They got the negative supply and they got the alibi.
Yes. They will literally pull out their phone and start recording.
Ugh, I've read so many cases of that.
They document the victim's breakdown. They use the victim's desperate, survival-driven explosion as forensic proof that the victim is the crazy, unstable, and dangerous one.
It is the ultimate culmination of Darvo.
It is. The victim is left so flooded with shame and guilt over their own reaction that they end up apologizing to the person who spent weeks driving them to the brink.
It's sickening. And if your brain is being subjected to that cycle, the baiting, the amygdala hijack, the 6-second cortisol loop firing 50 times a day, the reactive defense, the crushing shame, what happens to your cellular biology over years?
The long-term fallout is severe. It's often referred to as narcissistic abuse syndrome.
Right, because prolonged exposure to this specific brand of ambient psychological terror creates a distinct clinical profile,
One that heavily overlaps with complex PTSD or CPTSD.
which is fundamentally an injury of prolonged captivity, right?
Ah.
Even if the bars of the cage are invisible.
Exactly. It's the captivity of the mind.
And the somatic toll, how the body keeps the score, as Bessel van der Kolk says, is staggering.
The physical manifestations are undeniable.
The sources list chronic hypervigilance, where your nervous system is permanently stuck in a low-grade hum of anxiety. You're endlessly waiting for the next attack.
But it goes beyond just anxiety. It manifests physically as chronic migraines, severe gastrointestinal issues like acid reflux, fibromyalgia, insomnia.
Your body is physically deteriorating from the exhaust fumes of processing constant cortisol.
Your biology is burning out.
And psychologically, there's a total paralysis of executive function. Victims describe a complete inability to make even minor decisions.
Because in the abuser's ecosystem, every single decision the victim ever made was scrutinized.
What to wear, how to load the dishwasher, how to format a spreadsheet.
Criticized and weaponized against them. From the perspective of attachment theory, we see a complete erosion of the victim's differentiation of self.
Meaning they lose track of who they even are.
Yes. They lose the boundary between where they end and the abuser begins. They are forced to adopt the abuser's reality simply to navigate the day safely.
And that profound loss of identity maps onto a specific trauma adaptation that trauma researcher Pete Walker heavily details.
The trauma responses.
Right. We all know the classic nervous system responses: fight, flight, and freeze. But there is a fourth adaptation that is specifically relevant to covert manipulation.
The fawn response.
Yes, fawn. Break this down because it's so misunderstood.
The fawn response is a brilliant, albeit devastating, survival strategy.
Okay.
When fighting is impossible because the abuser holds the power,
Right.
and fleeing is not an option due to financial or familial entanglement,
You can't just leave.
and freezing leaves you vulnerable to further attack, the nervous system opts to fawn.
Which what?
Fawning is the absolute forfeiture of your own needs, boundaries, and identity in order to appease and pacify the threat.
It's extreme pathological people-pleasing.
It is threat mitigation through subservience.
Wow. Threat mitigation.
The unconscious logic is, if I can anticipate their every need, if I can manage their moods, if I can make myself perfectly small and endlessly useful, they will have no reason to attack me.
You attempt to neutralize the predator by becoming an indispensable extension of their own ego.
Precisely.
Yeah.
But the tragic flaw in that strategy is that the predator doesn't attack you because you made a mistake.
Right. They attack you because they require the psychological regulation of your pain, the supply.
Yes. So the abuse never stops, no matter how perfectly you fawn.
Which naturally leads to the question that outsiders always ask, the question that carries so much judgment. If it's that bad, why do they stay?
Why do they defend the person destroying them?
Exactly. It's such an unfair question.
Because that question completely ignores the biochemistry of the situation.
It's not a logical choice.
Not at all. The answer lies in the mechanics of intermittent reinforcement and the creation of a trauma bond.
A trauma bond, which is not just a metaphor for a bad relationship.
No, it is a deep biological and physiological addiction to the cycle of abuse.
So when I read the phrase addicted to the abuse, I literally had to stop and reread the paragraph.
It's hard to wrap your mind around.
How does the brain become addicted to its own destruction?
Well, the brain isn't addicted to the pain. It becomes addicted to the profound euphoric relief that follows the pain. The relief. Covert abusers do not manipulate 100% of the time. If they did, the victim would quickly recognize the danger and leave.
Right, it would be obvious.
Instead, they operate on intermittent reinforcement. It's the exact same psychological principle that makes slot machines so addictive.
Unpredictable rewards.
Exactly. The abuser will inflict severe psychological pain, the devaluation, the discard. But then, just as the victim reaches the breaking point, the abuser initiates hoovering.
Hoovering, like the vacuum cleaner, sucking the victim back in.
Yes, they flood the victim with love bombing, tearful apologies, promises of transformation, intense affection.
And what does that do to the brain?
This sudden shift from terror to safety triggers a massive release of dopamine and oxytocin in the victim's brain.
Oh.
The contrast between the agony of the abuse and the euphoria of the reconciliation creates a biochemical cocktail, and it bonds the victim to the abuser tighter than any healthy relationship ever could.
Because the victim's nervous system literally learns that the only person who can provide the antidote to their agonizing pain.
Is the exact person who poisoned them.
That is deeply tragic. And to survive the staggering cognitive dissonance of loving your own poisoner, the victim deploys the final defense mechanism: self-gaslighting.
Self-gaslighting is the internalization of Darvo.
The victim basically takes over the abuser's job.
To maintain the illusion of the trauma bond, the victim must rewrite their own history.
They tell themselves, it really wasn't that bad, or I'm too sensitive, just like they said.
Or if I had just anticipated their mood better, they wouldn't have had to scream at me.
They assume the blame because believing they were at fault gives them a false sense of control.
Right. If it's their fault, then theoretically they can fix it by being better.
Because recognizing that the abuser is fundamentally broken and actively choosing to hurt them.
Is the reality too terrifying for the nervous system to hold?
The architecture of this invisible landscape is absolutely brutal. I mean, we were talking about biological hijacking, memory manipulation, biochemical addiction.
It is a labyrinth.
But the mission of this deep dive isn't just to map the darkness, it's to provide the flashlight.
Yes. How to get out.
Let's move into hacking the system.
Yeah.
How do you survive this?
Yeah.
How do you dismantle the machinery of the trap?
The most vital rule from our neuroscience stack is sequence.
Sequence, meaning the order of operations.
Somatic regulation first, strategic communication second.
You cannot outlogic a flooded nervous system.
That is the golden rule of trauma recovery. You cannot reason with an amygdala hijack.
Right, because the motherboard is wet.
Exactly. If your prefrontal cortex is offline, no amount of perfectly crafted communication scripts will save you. You must physically convince your mammalian body that it is safe before your logical brain can come back online to defend you.
We must utilize somatic or body-based interventions. And the sources highlight several fascinating somatic hacks. One of the most compelling is a protocol called havening techniques.
Havening is incredible. It utilizes the actual electrophysiology of the brain.
How does it work?
It involves applying gentle, rhythmic touch to specific receptors on the body, usually by firmly stroking your own arms from the shoulder down to the elbow, or rhythmically rubbing the palms of your hands.
See, when I first read that, my skeptical brain thought, okay, rubbing your arms is going to stop a narcissist.
Right, it sounds too simple.
But the neuroscience behind what that touch does to the brainwaves is incredible.
It is entirely clinical. When you are in a state of high anxiety, your brain is producing rapid, high-frequency beta brainwaves. This specific rhythmic touch of havening generates slow, deep delta brainwaves.
And delta waves are the brainwaves associated with deep, restorative, dreamless sleep, right?
Exactly. When you introduce delta waves into an awake, hijacked brain, they physically compete with and begin to displace the high-frequency stress waves. The delta waves send a literal biological signal to the amygdala that the environmental threat has passed.
It actively downregulates the production of cortisol.
Yes, and it pulls you out of that refractory state. You are manually overriding your own alarm system.
That is practically a superpower. Another powerful somatic hack mentioned is orienting.
Orienting is very accessible.
So when you feel that surge of panic, when the abuser drops the bait and your chest tightens, instead of engaging with them, you force your physiological system to anchor to the present reality.
You move your eyes around the room.
Right. You explicitly name objects. There's a blue chair, there is a wooden door, the floor is solid.
Because orienting forces your visual cortex to send new data to the amygdala.
It says, look around. There is no physical predator in this room.
We are physically safe. And once the body registers that physical safety, the 6-second chemical wave can recede.
And the prefrontal cortex can finally reboot.
Exactly.
And once your logic is back online, then you can access your strategic communication arsenal.
Which brings us to the fundamental role of engaging with a toxic personality.
Never JD.
Never jade.
JD is an acronym representing the 4 most common traps victims fall into: justify, argue, defend, and explain.
Yes.
When an abuser launches a false accusation like when they Darvo you, your deepest human instinct is to defend your integrity.
You want to explain the facts. You want to argue the truth.
But the sources make it explicitly clear. The moment you JD, you have lost.
Because the abuser does not care about the truth.
They care about the narcissistic supply.
Exactly. By desperately explaining yourself, you are handing them the remote control to your nervous system.
You are signaling that their false reality has weight.
Yes. JEing provides them with endless new material to twist and use against you. It validates their implicit premise that your reality is up for debate and requires their approval.
So if you can't defend yourself, what is the strategy?
This leads us to one of the most famous tactical defenses in psychology, the gray rock method.
The gray rock method. Explain how this works.
Gray rocking is a behavioral modification strategy where you deliberately make yourself as uninteresting, unresponsive, and emotionally hollow as a gray rock on the ground.
You essentially become a brick wall.
Yes.
When they bait you, you give one-word, non-committal answers. Okay.
I see.
You maintain a completely flat, robotic tone of voice.
You strip your face of all micro-expressions, no anger, no defense, no fear, no joy.
Because the psychological mechanism here is emotional starvation.
Right.
The narcissist requires the dynamic friction of your emotional response to regulate their own shame. So gray rocking cuts off their oxygen.
You provide zero supply.
Exactly. Over time, the abuser realizes they cannot extract fuel from a rock, and they will typically grow bored and seek a more reactive target.
But I want to pull heavily from the legal and high-conflict communication sources here, because they introduce a massive, terrifying flaw with the gray rock method.
Yes, there is a significant risk. If you are dealing with a toxic co-parent in a family court battle, or a manipulative superior in front of corporate HR, going full gray rock can actually be weaponized against you.
It absolutely can.
If you sit in mediation and act cold, flat, robotic, and completely unresponsive, the abuser will simply point at you and say to the judge, Look how hostile, alienating, and uncooperative they are. I am trying to communicate, and they are stonewalling me.
That is a highly prevalent forensic risk.
It's so twisted.
Abusers are masters at performing the role of the reasonable victim for authority figures.
Right.
If your defense mechanism mimics hostility or contempt, the system will often penalize you.
Which is terrifying.
It is, and this recognized vulnerability is exactly why clinical and legal strategists evolved the method into a more sophisticated framework.
Known as yellow rocking.
Yes, yellow rocking.
This concept is a total lifesaver. How does it differ from gray rock?
Yellow rocking maintains the absolute emotional detachment and impenetrable boundaries of gray rock, but it drapes it in the superficial, polite veneer of a highly trained customer service representative.
Oh, it's the thank you so much for your inquiry. How may I direct your call energy?
Exactly. You deploy conventional social pleasantries. You say good morning. You say thank you for letting me know.
You maintain a relaxed, pleasant facial expression.
But beneath that polite surface, you are still giving them absolutely zero personal data, zero emotional reaction, and zero insight into your internal state.
It is strategic, documented neutrality.
Yes.
You are proving to the family court judge or the HR director that you possess high relational maturity and a willingness to cooperate.
Which completely neutralizes the abuser's smear campaign that you are the hostile one.
Meanwhile, you are still fundamentally starving the abuser of the emotional chaos they actually crave.
You are playing a multidimensional game. You are managing the external optics for the authorities while simultaneously protecting your internal psychological architecture.
And when it comes to written communication, which is where so much of this abuse happens, in emails, texts, co-parenting apps, our stack provides the ultimate structural defense.
From the High Conflict Institute.
The BIFF program.
BIFF, yes. It was developed by Bill Eddy, a clinical social worker and lawyer who specializes in high-conflict personalities.
BIF stands for brief, informative, friendly, and firm.
Let's walk through the anatomy of a BIFF response.
Okay, set the scene.
You receive a massive 5-paragraph email from your ex-partner or your toxic boss.
A novel of text.
It is riddled with darvo, insults about your character, distorted history from 3 years ago, and tons of emotional bait.
And your instinct is to write an essay back, debunking every single point.
Of course. But instead, you apply BIFF. Step 1, brief.
You keep your response to a maximum of 1 paragraph, ideally 2 to 3 sentences.
By keeping it brief, you physically limit the surface area they have to attack.
Smart. Step 2, informative.
You strip out all opinions, all defenses, all emotions. You deliver only objective, verifiable facts.
Step 3, friendly. That's the yellow rock component, right?
Exactly. A simple, polite greeting. Thanks for reaching out.
And step 4, firm.
This is where you close the loop so the conflict cannot continue. You state a boundary or offer a clear, binary choice.
But the true psychological brilliance of the BIFF protocol lies in what it structurally forces the conversation to do.
Right, the temporal shift.
High conflict personalities are obsessed with keeping you trapped in the past.
Always that.
They want to endlessly litigate who said what, who is to blame, and how terrible you are. They feed on the chaos of unresolvable history.
And BIFF entirely ignores the past.
You do not even acknowledge the insults.
You do not defend yourself.
You simply pivot the entire interaction toward a future proposal.
So instead of addressing their 5 paragraphs of rage, your BIFF email simply says, "Thanks for your email. Regarding the schedule this weekend, I will be at the designated exchange point at 5:00 p.m. on Friday. Please confirm yes or no by Thursday at noon if you will be there."
That is just brilliant. You have completely neutralized their reality distortion field.
You have ignored the bait.
You have provided a binary choice that forces them to operate in reality.
And in doing so, you transition from being the reactive, helpless target of their abuse
To being the active, unbothered director of the interaction. You are no longer fighting. You are managing.
managing the system.
Let's take a breath, because the density of what we've uncovered today is profound.
It's a lot to process.
We set out to map an invisible landscape,
Yeah.
and we have basically traced the entire psychological supply chain of covert abuse.
We started with the hollow core of the narcissist, the empty self that utilizes sprezzatura to camouflage its terrifying shame.
Surviving by extracting identity and emotional regulation from its victims.
Yes, we examined the architecture of their traps, how they use projection and crazy-making scripts to induce cognitive dissonance.
And the devastating mechanics of Darvo deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender, which can literally disrupt memory consolidation and force a victim to internalize a false reality.
We dove into the evolutionary neuroscience of the amygdala hijack.
We learned how a toxic email bypasses the prefrontal cortex, locking the brain in a high cortisol refractory state.
We uncovered the 6-second biological window.
And we reframed the victim's explosion not as reactive abuse, but as an involuntary, survival-driven reactive defense.
We charted the long-term somatic destruction, the overlap with complex PTSD, the profound identity loss of the fawn response.
And the biochemical addiction of trauma bonding that leads to the tragedy of self-gaslighting.
But then we armed ourselves with the tactical protocols.
We learned to hack the nervous system with somatic regulation, like havening and orienting, to bring the logic centers back online.
We learned to starve the abuser of supply using yellow rocking.
And we learned to wrest control of the narrative using the BIFF protocol.
When you step back and view this entire interconnected system, it forces a massive, liberating paradigm shift.
What is that shift for the listener?
For so many survivors of covert manipulation, the ultimate goal of their suffering is closure.
They want the apology.
They exhaust themselves trying to find the perfect combination of words that will finally make the abuser understand the pain they caused, or finally force the abuser to take accountability.
But the architecture we just mapped proves that closure from the abuser is a biological and psychological impossibility.
It is. The abuser's entire ego structure is built on a foundation of evading accountability,
Because acknowledging your reality would mean facing their own void.
which their mind categorizes as annihilation. Waiting for their apology is just another trap.
So true healing from this specific type of trauma is entirely an inside job.
It requires returning to that metaphorical X-ray machine.
The world may not see the fractures in your nervous system, but they are undeniably real.
Healing begins with a profound act of self-compassion.
It means forgiving your body for the ways it instinctively adapted to keep you alive.
Your fawning, your freezing, your explosive reactive defense, that wasn't you being weak or crazy.
That was your biology working perfectly in the dark.
Exactly.
Which brings us to one final, deeply provocative thought that emerged as I was synthesizing the neuroscience of trauma recovery against the pathology of the narcissist.
Let's hear it.
The abuser targeted you because of your empathy, your capacity for deep connection, and your psychological flexibility.
They saw those traits as resources to be extracted.
But those exact same traits, that profound emotional sensitivity, are the very mechanisms that allow for neuroplasticity.
Wow.
Because of your capacity to feel deeply and reflect internally, your brain possesses the biological hardware to physically rewire itself through somatic healing and post-traumatic growth.
You have the capacity to build a richer, more regulated, more deeply connected life after the trauma.
While the abuser, trapped in their rigid, highly defended false self, lacks the necessary vulnerability to ever achieve neuroplastic change.
They are condemned to repeat the exact same hollow cycle, forever hunting for external supply to fill a void that can never be closed.
The sensitivity that made you their target is the exact superpower that ensures your ultimate escape. Reclaiming your stolen reality and using it to grow beyond their reach, that is the ultimate boundary.